Good afternoon from Jerusalem and welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs War Room Update. We are talking about the war of Israel with the Gaza and the terrorists in Gaza, Hamas leading that group of terrorists, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades, and all of the other terrorists in the Gaza Strip. This war has been going on since the 7th of October, when the terrorists infiltrated Israel and murdered over 1,200 people, kidnapped another 240. In the Gaza Strip itself, the IDF forces have been operating ever since, in the air, on the ground, and from the sea. The IDF forces have been attacking the terrorists in all of their different hideouts, on the ground and under the ground, in that 560 kilometers long terrorist infrastructure that they had dug and prepared ready for this assault. The IDF forces have managed to take wide control over the northern Gaza Strip and are now operating in the southern Gaza Strip, predominantly at the moment in Khan Yunis, where the Hamas leadership is still to be found and where they are holding many of the hostages. It will have to move on also to Rafah, that southern area of the Gaza Strip, where similarly the Hamas leadership and the hostages are being held. This is something that has been really a command for Israel since the start of the war, to destroy Hamas and to destroy its infrastructure and to ensure that the Gaza Strip no longer poses a danger to Israel. In the north, we've continued on with that war of attrition carried out by the Iranian proxy, by Hezbollah, who continues to fire missiles at Israel's north. Over 2,200 missiles have now been fired into the north by Hezbollah terrorists, and they continue all the time, even as we speak. More air raid sirens going off in the north, warning of those firing of rockets and anti-tank missiles. In the south, the Houthis, another Iranian proxy, have continued on with their interruption of the freedom of navigation of the sea, on the seas, on the high seas, and interfering with everything going up through the Horn of Africa, coming up through the Red Sea, and then into the Suez Canal. That is something which they've been doing, and on a regular basis, attacking all types of ships, not only Israeli ships, but also other ships of foreign flags. What we're going to discuss today, and I'm joined for this discussion with the president of the JCPA, with Dr. Dan Diker, and with Sharona Shir Zablodovsky, a specialist in public policy and national security. And what we're going to discuss today is UNRWA, the UN special organization, agency that works solely for and on behalf of and for the benefit of the Palestine refugees. This is a group of people who were defined in 1948 as the people who ran away from Israel at the command, really, of the Arab forces, and have since then been living outside of Israel as it's defined by the 1949 armistice lines. These people have been living as refugees for 75 years, never being allowed to settle in any way, shape or form, suffering from poverty, and really being used as pawns constantly by both UNRWA, the UN, and the international community as a means to attack Israel. As part of the October 7 massacre, many things have been discovered about UNRWA. Most predominantly that of the 12,000 strong force of UNRWA in the Gaza Strip, over 10% were active members of terrorist organizations. Many of them actively participated in the October 7 massacre, whether it be by infiltrating Israel and actually participating in the murders, the kidnapping of Israeli hostages, or of receiving them in the Gaza Strip. Hundreds of these terrorists had infiltrated UNRWA from every shape and form. Now, this is something which poses a massive problem for the international community. How could it be that you have a UN agency that, albeit is dedicated to the destruction of Israel by its mandate, but in which the terrorists had managed to infiltrate so deeply and so thoroughly throughout the organization? Sharona, what we want to discuss today really is, to what extent were these exposures about UNRWA a surprise to either to yourself, given your professional background, or to the international community? Had there been discussion about UNRWA previously, and if so, what?
Okay, first of all, hi, good afternoon from Tel Aviv, Israel. I think that, unfortunately for me, due to the fact that I used to work several years in a center who does mainly research on the education textbooks of UNRWA in Gaza and other areas, it's not that surprising, because the incitement in the textbooks is just getting worse year by year. And due to the fact that every year UNRWA is, how can I say it, sending the kids that are supposed to go to summer camps to have fun, like our kids, to go to the pool or to play soccer, they go to learn how to use weapons. There are like little soldiers. So unfortunately, again, I think it's not that surprising. They have one goal. They have by their own perspective, the right for resistance against Israel, and the consequences is 7th of October. So on the international side, I think that it's more complicated. I can't say, like, I'm not talking behalf of the international arena, but I think that there were assumptions that it's very bad, and 7th of October demonstrated everyone that it's very bad, that UNRWA and Hamas are engaged much more than anyone wanted to believe in. So,
Sharona, it's been clear for many years to us at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, as well as other organizations in Israel, also you as a leading researcher on this issue, also governments of Israel, of all, of the entire rainbow of political positions, that UNRWA has become essentially a training camp for children for jihad, a training camp for educating children to jihad, sanctioning children for jihad, teaching children for jihad, and yet we're in 2024, 75 years after UNRWA was founded, and only now, after the massacre of the 7th of October, have people started to take action, to expose, to educate, to engage on this issue. Why, in your sense, has it taken so many decades for this issue, which has not been hidden, it's been clear, but it's taken decades for the urgency of such an issue to reach the surface?
I think that the West in general, and I think some of the people in Israel also, have, I think that the big mistake was not listening to what they're saying. The theme, the narrative, has always been, in the last 75 years, the same narrative. It became much more blunt, but at the beginning, UNRWA was established to end the situation in a few years and to give a steady place which the Palestinians can live in. But I think that the lack of hearing, like really listening to what they're saying, I think that was the mistake. I think that people did not give them credit, because we saw on 7th of October, this massacre was very high strategically planned. It was thousands of people engaged with. They had maps. It's very organized. This whole anti-Semitic situation is aimed to a certain goal. And it's been going on for 75 years. They know what they want. I think that from our end, we're not listening to what they're saying. They don't want Judea and Samaria. They want the whole of Israel. From their perspective, Palestine is the whole state of Israel. We are just a phase in history from their perspective. And it's time to start listening to what they're saying. They are serious.
I
in their
think that
intentions.
what Sharona really is saying also is that when you look at the history of UNRWA, when it was set up initially in 1948-49, it was meant to be a temporary organization. It then developed into this organization that self-defined itself. It defined itself as the organization that is going to help these refugees come back and flood Israel. Since then, everything really that the organization has done has been defined by that goal, assisting these people to really perpetuate the idea that they will return to Israel, that they will destroy Israel demographically and democratically, and that has perpetuated this whole situation. Within that definition of the organization itself, then came the people working within the organization, and it was so easy for Hamas to infiltrate and take over because the organization itself saw as its goals and had as its goals the destruction of Israel, so it fit really very well together with Hamas.
Clearly, it did. The question arises also as why UNRWA didn't see Jordan, which was part of historical Palestine, British Mandate Palestine, to be part of their. Was that part of their educational doctrine as well? Would be to destroy what became the Kingdom of Jordan, which in their, according to Arafat and according to the whole Palestinian narrative of the last 100 years, was the majority part of what they call Palestine.
They don't have any big mentions about Jordan. They always, like, if you open the textbooks, the land that they're claiming to be theirs as Palestine is the state of Israel. It's the same place. They don't have intentions to overlap to Jordan. From their end, Jordan is not their goal. So although there are Palestinians that live in Jordan, they don't see it's like their home. It's just a temporary situation. So I think that at the end of the day, as Maurice said, they knew from the beginning that they are going to insist with the resistance to the fact that Jews have a state. And it doesn't matter which size it will be. From their end, there is no place for a Jewish state.
And that's, I think, really the fundamental
Clearly.
understanding of UNRWA's mandate, that it doesn't see really the existence of a Jewish national homeland, but rather a country in which there will be really a mix of all of the populations and really a wiping out and erasing of that very, very clear boundary. Jordan, for them, isn't part of their mandate really to bring about Palestine, but it's the opposite. Jordan is ex-territory. It's only Israel. It's only focused on Israel. That appears to be their sole mandate.
Clearly. So what in your view has been the most frustrating part of monitoring the UNRWA school books? I mean, there have been a number of NGOs in Israel, like Impact, that have monitored the school books, and yet for so many years, nothing legislatively has happened. Nothing really diplomatically has happened. And are you attributing that to Israel's neglect, pursuit, simply not listening to what UNRWA how UNRWA educates these children to holy war against the Jews?
I think that I know, like, it has repeated phrase to conception, but the conception was it's not an immediate threat. But this system, the UNRWA education, the UNRWA culture, the narrative, the right of return, all these are, I think, was, how can I say, it was neglected. I don't think anyone thought it's good, but I think some of us here and in the international arena got used to it. We got used to this situation. We didn't think it will be like a time bomb. But unfortunately, every year in the textbooks, we see that the incitement is just getting worse. It takes every time another step. If in the textbooks we saw that they were calling the state of Israel, Israel, now we're a Zionist occupation. So I think that the fact that they are erasing us from the consciousness of the children that study there shows us that they are serious, they have very good strategics, and their goal is to end the Jewish state.
I think for all of the different players, Dan, unfortunately, UNRWA became very, very convenient. For the international community, they could pay the lip service and say, well, we're helping the Palestinian refugees. For the Palestinians, they could say, well, there's this group of people who are eventually going to come back and flood and destroy Israel. Even to a certain extent, UNRWA became convenient for Israel as well. There was this other organization that was dealing with the refugees, in some cases, even within Judea and Samaria, in the Gaza Strip. There was another body there that was providing services that maybe alleviated the onus on Israel. And I don't think anyone really understood that the goal of this organization is really to, at least on our side, we didn't understand, that the goal of the organization, the DNA of the organization, is simply to destroy Israel.
Clearly, I think that there's a deeper problem here that UNRWA reveals. UNRWA exposes the failure of the Israeli body politic, its political leadership, its diplomatic urgency, its military concept of threat, which I think we can safely say now, if it hasn't changed, it must change. Israel has never understood in its national security concept the importance of soft power, the importance of what they say in Hebrew is toda'ah, which is called perception, which is called influence. We say in Israel, todah ve'ashpa'a, or ashpa'a ve'toda'ah. And this has become one of the most dangerous failures that Israel has brought upon itself, because in the same discussion we have about what we call Hamas UNRWA, we talk about ISIS Hamas, we talk about the PA. The Palestinian Authority, Hamas, and UNRWA speak in the same lexicon, with the same intentions about Israel. But, you know, Israel has been very, very, I would say, cynical about these types of threats. And we like to say at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs that the mistake that Israel's made for so many generations is that if it doesn't blow up in your face, it's not dangerous. And here, as Sharona says, October 7th was the nuclear explosion of the UNRWA textbooks, of the UNRWA schoolyards, which actually literally held kidnapped victims, which literally held ammunition and weaponry and incitement to murder. So this UNRWA becomes a microcosm of the Israeli vulnerability to non-military threats and its failure to recognize the power of other threats besides the military threat.
Really, that failure to understand really the extent to which that influence wielded by these organizations, both internationally and their influence on the local populations, whether it be in Gaza, in Judea and Samaria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, whether that thing which is positive or negative. And really the influence is entirely negative. It's teaching and perpetuating that idea of destruction of Israel, even though it's meant to be an organization which, for the refugees, that, let's remember, hasn't managed to settle even one refugee. The number of refugees has grown from 711,000 in 1949 to over 6 million allegedly today. and really an entire organization that's failed entirely to meet any of its goals, unless its goal really was to undermine and destroy Israel.
No, I think that's succeeded I think it's succeeded to, as Sharona has said so well, to incite several million, well, certainly in Gaza it would be 2 million, and in Judea and Samaria another 1.6 million, another 1.7 million, even though the Palestinian Authority classically brings that number to astronomical figures like 3 million, which have really no bearing in reality. But here's the question, Sharona. There is a discussion going on in Israel among the professional class, among the intellectual class, among the political class, and even in the public, that UNRWA either should be disbanded, meaning it should be closed down, or reformed. Where do you fall out on this? Can an organization like this, in which 90% of its employees, both on the educational side and on the refugee assistance side, are employed by, affiliated with the Hamas, or under Hamas control, can this type of organization be reformed, or must it be completely reconstructed from the beginning?
I think that a lot of people who does really good work in this field really want to close UNRWA. I don't think it will happen, because most of the money, if not all of the donations, comes voluntarily from states as the US, as the EU, as Germany, who donate directly to UNRWA the money. So we can't enforce them to stop giving them the money. It's voluntarily. They see it as a humanitarian cause. We can only show the horrors. And I think personally the child abuse that's going on in UNRWA, because at the end of the day what they teach is to kids not to have a future, only to hurt themselves and other civilians, which are Jews. That's the first. But I think a reform can only be if we are going to insist on a few things that must happen. And I think the call to action is immediately. First of all, since we saw a strong connection between UNRWA and Hamas, we must take out the headquarters of UNRWA from Jerusalem immediately. Immediately. We have to decide what we're going to do with Shoafat camp, which is inside the sovereignty in Israel. It's an absurd situation that people who claim to be registered refugees are living as civilians in Israel. This must be stopped, because it's a time bomb. They have different perspective. They don't accept the sovereignty. They don't accept being a part of Israel. So that too, call to action must be done, I think, this week, if it's possible. Second of all, a reform in the educational system. We can impose a situation like that. I think that the Palestinians themselves would not accept that. Because when I worked at the NGO and we reached out to UNRWA, they said, we don't take any responsibility of the textbooks. Every region decide for themselves what will be the content. So to do a reform is to really bring a state and in someone who is not biased, and to really get into the textbooks and to check if what they say will really be the content. And I'm saying it because there was a very nice idea a few weeks ago that was suggested to bring American teachers to teach in UNRWA schools in Gaza. At the end of the day, I don't think that the Palestinians will agree to this kind of suggestion.
So I think then what we
So
what we need to do when we're discussing the dismantling of UNRWA is really break it down geographically. Does Israel care about UNRWA in Lebanon, in Jordan, whether it continues to function? Yes or no? That's a question, obviously, I think strategically we have to look at and hope for the entire dismantling of UNRWA and the settlement of those people where they've been living for the last 75 years. I think in the Gaza Strip, Israel has to ensure that there is no further UNRWA presence. UNRWA has proven to be an organization that is entirely dominated by the terrorists, in support of the terrorists. It provides that entire framework and mechanisms for the terrorists, and therefore, in any day after scenario for the Gaza Strip, UNRWA cannot be a part. As regards the education, and that's what Sharona touched on, UNRWA hides behind a general rule. What does that general rule say? That they teach the educational materials of the host nation. So when it's they're in Lebanon, they teach the Lebanese curriculum. In Jordan, they teach the Jordanian curriculum. In the Palestinian Authority territories, including the Gaza Strip, what Sharona was describing, this education to hate, denial of Israel's right to exist, really the desire to destroy Israel, isn't unique to UNRWA itself. Obviously, it's part of their broader agenda, but it's really part of the education system of the Palestinian Authority. A few years ago, there was a spat between UNRWA and the PA, right? UNRWA, as part of a new deal with Canada, a new funding deal, pointed out to the PA that some of the educational material that was included in the new school books wasn't appropriate and could not be taken into account without breaching UNRWA's supposed duty of neutrality. The PA responded, "We don't care." It got so serious between the PA and UNRWA that the PA actually cut off its relations with UNRWA until UNRWA capitulated and continued teaching this desire to destroy Israel, deny Israel's right to exist, and to destroy and murder Israelis. And that's really where we're standing. So it's the connection of UNRWA not only to an organization that's bad in and of itself, but to that whole idea of the Palestinian Authority, of the Oslo process, of that deepening of the Palestinian narrative denying Israel's very right to exist. And that's really where UNRWA goes hand in hand, as you exactly said, with Hamas, with Mahmoud Abbas, with the PA. There is no real difference between these organizations. Hamas equals PA equals UNRWA, and that's really where we're standing with all of these organizations. The question is whether the international community really understood that. And it's not only reaching out to UNRWA, and it's not reaching out to the PA where there is nobody to talk about, nobody to talk to, but rather, what about the countries that fund UNRWA? Canada, for example, knew that the school books, the educational materials, breached the contract with UNRWA. The United States, as we wrote just a few days ago, had to approve funding to UNRWA and say that both the educational materials were commensurate to peace and that none of the money that was going to UNRWA was going to terrorists. Now, we know that both of those criteria could not possibly have been met. So, was there a question of UNRWA misleading the Secretary of State?
There's a question of Israel failing to speak out. Israel is the head of the spear. It is time. This has been a ticking time bomb that has blown up, murdered what is commensurate with 35,000 Americans in a 24-hour period, and another 7,000 Americans kidnapped, and currently you have basically 3,500 Americans still being held commensurate in Gaza, and UNRWA plays a key role. The ticking time bomb has blown up, and it is time for Israel to stop silence and take the lead in order in putting all of the donor nations on notice. We cannot expect more from the donor nations than we expect from Israel. Israel must take the lead. It is time to stop staying silent and start voicing moral clarity to the international community. I think that's the
That's
the
without
bottom
question,
line
Dan.
of the show.
The government of Israel needs to now take this opportunity. Really, it's an opportunity, October 7, to make a massive strategic change in the way that the region looks, both as regards UNRWA and other UN organizations, and really lead that charge saying we will no longer tolerate this.
That's right.
As long as Israel used UNRWA as almost as a crutch to lean on, then it was convenient. But that convenience, as you said, just blew up in our face, and it's something that needs to be changed. And the question is, are we seeing that change now within the government? Are we seeing that change in the security mechanisms and establishment? Is the army going to change its reliance on UNRWA? We've heard possibly different voices on that subject. COGAT, the coordinator for the government activities in the territories that we used to work so closely with UNRWA, still sees the UNRWA possibly as a part of the solution. And that's something which needs to fundamentally change. Sharona, as we do almost on a regular basis, as far as we remember to do, unfortunately our time has run out. Leave us with a positive note moving forward with UNRWA and what the change could be, both for the benefit of the refugees that have been living in suspension for 75 years, and for Israel and its strategically changing the picture of the Middle East.
I think I want to say something about regarding what Dan just said. I think that this is a time that Israel must take this moment and decide that it is leading the situation into a solution, because the whole situation is just absurd. We must claim once and for all that the state of Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. It's our home. And I think that if we will explain to ourselves that the situation is permanent, it will be much more easier for the Israeli government to convey this message outside. I think that it's much more of a Jewish peoplehood moment for us.
That question.
I think that, as I mentioned before, it is the time to take the Jerusalem headquarters of UNRWA outside, and like this week it has to be
Closed
evacuated ASAP. We must solve the refugee camp in Shuafat. We must demand an international, I think, intervention that we can rely on to solve the situation of the resistance that UNRWA is representing. They represent the resistance against the state of Israel, and this must end. And if we step our foot on it, it will happen. So it's like the butterfly syndrome effect. If we take an action, the world will see it, and I think that this situation can be solved. And to stop this, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say it more.
You're saying it quite clearly, Sharon. It's very.
No, I'm saying it. The situation, the narrative of generation by generation of refugees is absurd. This must end.
I think rather what Sharon is saying is, and Dan, what we need to do is Israel needs to take the initiative. Israel needs to lead. What we've managed to prove so far in this war is that where we do take the initiative, where we do lead, where we put our foot down on our base, we've managed to persuade not only ourselves, but also the international community. And that's what we need to do going forward also with UNRWA. Sharona, thank you for joining us today and for your insights. Thank you for everyone for joining us as well on the program. And we hope to see you again in a few days' time. Until then, keep safe, everyone.
Thank you, our friends at JLTV in the United States, who will become our central distribution partners for our program here.